On the day I went to try on my wedding dress, Enzo had said he would come with me, but he never showed up. The train of the gown was too long. I stood alone in front of the mirror, bending over again and again to fix it more than a dozen times. The third time I stepped on the hem, my phone finally buzzed. Natalie just came back and isn't used to the weather here. I'll go pick her up. You try on the dress first. The next second, a new post popped up on social media. Natalie had uploaded a photo. In it, Enzo was crouched in front of her, one hand wrapped around her slender ankle as he carefully fastened the strap of her high heels. The caption was only one line. He still couldn't bear to let me bend down. When I tapped into the post, I saw that Enzo had already liked it. The bridal assistant sensed the shift in the air and tried to comfort me in a low voice. Ms. Blackwood, Mr. Beck really cares about you. He was worried you might secretly diet and hurt your health, so he specifically told us not to alter the waistline any further. I smiled. He cared about me, yes, but his care had never stopped him from favoring someone else. I lowered my head and looked at the wedding dress on my body. Then it suddenly struck me. The thing that did not fit had never been the dress. It was this wedding. Early the next morning, the sound of the door unlocking came from the living room. A moment later, the corner of my blanket was lifted, and a cool hand slid around my waist from behind, pulling me into an embrace. Stop pretending. I knew you were awake the moment I walked in. Enzo Beck chuckled softly, his chin brushing against the hollow of my neck. After all these years, when have you ever slept well without me beside you? His casual teasing made my eyes sting instantly. He knew everything, yet he had still left me alone all night without a word. The crisp scent of body wash drifted into my nose. I frowned, but beneath it, I could still catch a trace of perfume, sweet, cloying, unmistakable. It was Natalie Spencer's favorite brand, completely at odds with the cool, woody scent I usually wore. My stomach churned. Suddenly, it felt like nothing I said would matter. So I pried his hand off my waist, threw back the covers, and got out of bed, walking barefoot into the bathroom. Cold water splashed against my face, droplets running down from my chin. I lifted my head and looked at myself in the mirror, pale, with dark circles carved beneath my eyes after an entire sleepless night. Footsteps followed behind me. Enzo stepped in and wrapped his arms around my waist again. In the mirror, he looked refreshed, almost radiant. Every part of him carried the unmistakable glow of someone thoroughly indulged. Still mad? Just because I didn't go with you yesterday?
He sighed.
I've already gone with you to try that dress several times. What's wrong with missing it once? Natalie just got back. She was alone with all that luggage. As a friend, I had to pick her up. You're usually so reasonable. Why make a fuss over something this small? Do you really have to give me the silent treatment over this? I'm fine. I brushed his hands away, hung the towel back on the rack, and turned to leave. Really? Enzo followed me out, sounding noticeably more relaxed. Did you finalize the dress yesterday then? Send me the bill. I'll sign it. I walked over to the bedside table, pulled open the drawer, and took out the stamped order form. Without looking at him, I walked straight to the shredder by the desk and fed the bill into it. The machine whirred to life. The order form, with its waistline altered more than a dozen times, was reduced to thin strips of paper and dropped into the bin. He froze for 2 seconds before turning and grabbing my wrist. What are you doing? His expression darkened, anger barely restrained. What kind of tantrum is this? You're even canceling the wedding dress now. His grip tightened painfully around my wrist. I lowered my eyes to the veins standing out on the back of his hand and realized I did not even have the strength to argue. I'm not making a fuss. I met his gaze and slowly pulled my hand free. That shop kept altering the waist, but it still didn't fit. I don't want it anymore. Then I pushed past him, walked to the entryway, and changed my shoes. Just before the door closed, I heard him calling his assistant from the living room. Check what happened at the bridal shop yesterday. Right now. Find out who upset her this time. I swear, this is hell. Tell the manager to remake the dress in the original size and send it over. The hallway was quiet. I stood by the elevator as cold air poured from the vent, chilling me to the bone. What he didn't understand was that it had never been about the dress. It was about his favoritism. I took out my phone, opened my notes, and found the wedding schedule. Then, I swiped left and tapped delete. After work, I went straight to our newly renovated marital apartment to pick up the drafts I had left behind. The moment I stepped out of the elevator, I saw a pair of women's shoes by the door, the same pair from the social media post the day before. I stared at them for 2 seconds, then unlocked the door. The living room was quiet. Natalie sat on the cream-colored sofa we had spent 3 months picking out together, wearing an oversized t-shirt. The moment she saw me, She jumped to her feet, flustered, and called out instinctively, "Enzo." The study door opened at once, and Enzo walked out. When he saw me standing at the entrance, surprise flickered in his eyes, but it disappeared just as quickly. Enzo stepped toward me. Natalie isn't comfortable staying alone in a hotel. And with me not around, it isn't convenient for her to stay at my parents' place either, so I let her stay here for a few days. She'll move out once she finds her own place. Natalie looked up at me timidly, her voice soft and aggrieved. "Estelle, I know I shouldn't have done this, but my parents, they passed away in a hotel fire back then. If it bothers you, I can find a shared place and make do for a few days." As she spoke, she reached for her phone. "Natalie." Enzo stopped her, frowning. "Don't. Estelle won't mind." I looked at him quietly, at the man I had loved for so many years. He stood in front of me, utterly certain of himself, handing over our marital home to another woman as if it were only natural, not even allowing me a say. My gaze swept across the apartment. I had designed every inch of this place. We had chosen the sofa together. I had personally mixed the paint for the walls. Even the artwork hanging there was mine. And now, Natalie sat in the middle of it all, perfectly at ease, basking in his protection. My eyes fell on the oversized t-shirt she was wearing, and my thoughts drifted back to the day we painted the walls. I had been afraid he would stain his suit, so I bought him a change of clothes. I had hesitated for a long time before giving it to him, worried he would think it looked cheap. But not only had he not disliked it, he had even said he would wash it and keep it properly. Yet now, the shirt he had once said he wanted to treasure was being worn so casually by her. Rain drizzled softly outside, and something inside me turned damp and heavy along with it. I did not want to argue or lose control. I simply looked around for my sketchbook. Near the coffee table, a half-dried towel lay on the floor. My sketchbook was pinned beneath it, one corner sticking out. I crouched down and pulled it free. The damp part of the towel had soaked through the back half. The pages were waterlogged, colors bleeding into each other. Blue, green, red, all smeared into a muddy mess. My fingers trembled as I flipped through it, page after page. Ruined. Natalie could not read what lay beneath my calm, and tears immediately welled up in her eyes. "I am sorry. I thought the sketchbook was really cute, and the story inside was so touching, so I flipped through it for a bit. I didn't expect to forget where I put it after my shower. Is it important to you? I study art too. I can compensate you, okay?" I held the soaked, ruined sketchbook and felt nothing but emptiness. Then I stood, slipped it into my bag, and turned to leave. "Estelle." Enzo grabbed my wrist. "Natalie didn't mean it. Don't. It's fine." It really did not matter anymore. The door closed behind me. In the elevator, the metal doors reflected a blurred version of my face. I could hear the muffled scolding from inside the room, Natalie's attempts to explain, and her broken sobs. But none of it mattered anymore. That night, after I got home, I spread out the picture book and tried to fix it. Just as I was about to pick up my pen, my phone lit up. It was a message from the shop handling our wedding favors, asking me to confirm the design. I tapped it open. On the screen were two cartoon figures modeled after Enzo and me. The lines were smooth, the colors warm. When I had drawn them, my heart had been full of happiness. Now, only disappointment remained. I lingered for a moment, then typed a few words. "Thank you, but I won't need this anymore." The moment I sent the message, my phone rang. It was the chief editor I had been working with. "Ms. Blackwood, I'm very sorry to inform you that our collaboration has to be terminated. We can't disclose the specific reasons. We've simply found a more suitable candidate. My apologies." The call ended. The dull hum of the disconnected line filled my ear as I held the phone, my fingertips turning cold. For some reason, one thought surfaced in my mind. I pulled up Enzo's number and called him directly. "The publishing deal is being terminated." "That was you, wasn't it?" There was a few seconds of silence on the other end. I knew that silence all too well. Every time he needed to gather his thoughts, every time he was about to say something that would hurt me, it was exactly like this. "Natalie's situation is more difficult than yours," he finally said. "She suffered domestic abuse overseas and only just managed to get divorced and come back. She needs a way to rebuild her life. Back then, her family saved my parents. My parents promised to take care of her. Please understand where I'm coming from." I lowered my eyes and stared at the smeared colors on the page. My tears fell, without warning. This picture book had been left unfinished when my mother passed away. I had promised her that no matter what, I would see it published. It had taken me 3 years. Stroke by stroke, I completed what she had left behind. I had tested every shade of color myself. I rebuilt the story based on her notes. Back then, at her bedside, I had promised her two things: that I would live well with Enzo, and that I would publish this book. Now, I had failed both. Perhaps he heard the faint change in my breathing because his tone softened slightly. Don't worry. I'll make sure to find you a better publisher to make up for this. I won't let your story be buried. No need. I did not want to continue this story anymore. Life went on quietly, as if nothing had happened. I shut myself inside my studio and locked the door. Every draft, every sketch, every version of the book I had worked on, I organized them all and stored them deep inside a cabinet. Then, I spread out a fresh sheet of paper and started again. This time, I would draw a new story, one that belonged only to my mother. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was an international number. Hello, is this Ms. Estelle Blackwood? We are the most renowned independent art publishing house in Falden. We came across some of the works you previously posted online and would like to acquire your series. I froze for a moment. That institution in Falden was one of the top in the industry, with extremely high standards. I had submitted to them 3 times before and never even received a reply. For them to approach me out of nowhere, it was most likely Enzo's doing. I'm sorry, I said, steadying myself. I don't have any plans to sell my work at the moment. There was a brief pause. Then, a mocking laugh came through the line. Ms. Blackwood, there is no need to act so high and mighty. An opportunity handed to you through Mr. Beck's connections, and you still refuse it? Do you really think you got here on your own ability? Even through the foreign language, the insult was unmistakable. I said nothing and hung up. A few days later, I browsed through smaller publishing houses and studios, hoping to find another possibility. Then, one name suddenly caught my eye. I clicked into it. The introduction contained only a single line: "Never forget why you started." There was nothing harder than holding on to that reason. I stared at those words for a long time. Then, I opened my email, organized the revised sample pages of the picture book, filled out the submission form, and clicked send. Just before I got off work, Enzo's mother, Camelia Crawford, called. She asked me to return to the family home for dinner and finalize the wedding arrangements. I held my phone, watching her name flash across the screen, quietly rehearsing how I would explain that I wanted to cancel the wedding. When I arrived, I had barely pushed open the living room door when laughter spilled out. Natalie sat close beside Camelia on the sofa, their arms linked, chatting intimately. Both of them were smiling brightly. I, on the other hand, stood at the entryway like an outsider who did not belong. Camelia patted Natalie's hand, her tone full of regret. If you hadn't gone abroad back then, you'd be the one marrying Enzo now instead of that small-minded woman. I continued to change my shoes, though my stomach churned with disgust. I might not have parents anymore, but they had left me with more than enough. Still, in their eyes, that wasn't enough to make me respectable. Mom, that's enough. Enzo frowned and cut her off. I truly love Estelle. Stop comparing her to Natalie. As he spoke, his gaze fell on me, gentle and placating, and he stepped closer as if to take my hand. But I avoided him and walked toward the sofa. Camelia noticed me, her smile fading as she spoke coolly. Since you're here, sit. Her hand remained firmly clasped around Natalie's, as though I were nothing more than a stranger. I had barely taken a step closer when my gaze froze. Around Natalie's neck hung an emerald necklace that had belonged to my mother. Noticing where I was looking, Natalie lifted a hand to touch it, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. Mrs. Beck gave this to me. She said it suits me. What do you think? I stared at the necklace, my voice turning cold. When did my mother's belongings become the Beck family's property? Camelia's expression darkened. She stood abruptly and pointed at me. Your mother let me that necklace back then. If you had even half her generosity, you wouldn't be so petty. It's just a worthless necklace. Don't act like anyone actually cares about it. I let out a faint, humorless laugh. Have you ever heard of borrowing something and returning it? Keeping it for yourself is one thing, but to pass it on to someone else? Aren't you afraid the dead might come knocking in the middle of the night? How dare you? Camelia trembled with anger, her fingers shaking as she pointed at me. How dare you speak to me like that? Enzo quickly stepped forward and grabbed my arm, lowering his voice. Estelle, the wedding is just around the corner. There's no need to fall out over a necklace. Once we're married, what's mine is yours. If you want a necklace, we can pick the most expensive one tomorrow, all right? I looked at him coldly. There was nothing but sincerity in his eyes. To me, however, that sincerity felt unbearably cheap. I don't care for anything you have. I slowly pulled my hand free. This marriage is over. The living room fell silent. Camelia froze for a moment before her voice shot up. You think you can just cancel the wedding like that? Who do you think we are? A family you can cling to and dump as you please? You think you matter to us. I ignored her, stepped forward, and yanked the necklace off Natalie's neck.
Ah,
Natalie cried out, clutching her throat as she shrank back, tears falling instantly. Enzo, she. Estelle, that's enough. Enzo seized my wrist, his brows drawn tight. Do you have to throw a tantrum at a time like this? I wrenched my hand free, clenched the necklace in my palm, and turned to leave without another glance. The night wind hit my face, and the necklace pressed painfully into my skin. When I got home, my phone buzzed. It was an acceptance notice from that small studio. I stared at the screen for a long time, my eyes stinging. Then I placed the necklace into a drawer. Opening my wardrobe, I took out a suitcase, packed a few everyday clothes, and grabbed my drawing board. Then, I opened my phone and booked a ticket to a small southern town. There was nothing left in this city worth holding on to. The train pulled out of the station just as the dawn was breaking, casting a pale, watery light over the concrete platforms of the city. Estelle leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the gray towers and sprawling overpasses gradually give way to misty fields and dark clusters of pine trees. She had not slept. In her lap, her hand remained closed around her mother's emerald necklace, the metal cold and biting against her palm. It was the only heavy thing she carried. Her suitcase was light, containing only a few changes of clothes, her drawing tablet, and a single, clean sketchbook. For the past 5 years, Estelle's world had been defined by a narrow radius. The apartment she had meticulously designed, the corporate office where she spent her days, and the Beck family mansion where she had learned to sit quietly, smile on command, and swallow her own pride. Now, as the train sped southward, that entire world felt like a drawing done in faint charcoal, easily smudged out of existence. 12 hours later, she stepped off the platform at Lushue. Lushue was a town built on water, far removed from the rapid, unforgiving pace of the northern capital. Here, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth, river moss, and coal smoke from old kitchens. Stone bridges, blackened by decades of rain, arched over narrow canals where wooden boats glided lazily through the green water. Estelle pulled her suitcase along the uneven cobblestones, the sound of the wheels clicking rhythmically in the quiet afternoon. She followed the directions on her phone to a small courtyard house tucked away in a quiet alley near the edge of the town. The wooden sign beside the door read Verdant Press in simple, hand-painted calligraphy. When she knocked, the door was opened by a woman in her late 50s, wearing a simple linen apron and wire-rimmed glasses. Her hair was pulled back into a loose bun, threaded with silver. This was Clara Vance, the founder of the small, independent studio that had accepted Estelle's draft. Estelle Blackwood? Clara's voice was dry but warm, like old paper. She looked Estelle up and down, her gaze lingering on the pale exhaustion etched into her face. You look like you've traveled a long way just to escape something. I have, Estelle said honestly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Clara smiled faintly and stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter.
good. The
Best stories are usually written by people who have run out of places to hide.
Commune.
The tea is fresh. The courtyard was small but filled with green life, pots of wild ferns, ivy, climbing the ancient brick walls, and a small stone basin where water trickled from a bamboo pipe. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, high-end apartment Enzo had bought, where every piece of furniture had been selected for its status, rather than its comfort. Clara led her into a small office crowded with bookshelves, stacks of heavy watercolor paper, and the rich, dusty smell of ink. We're a small operation, Clara said, pouring hot water over dried chrysanthemum flowers. We don't have the marketing budget of the big houses in the capital. We can't put your face on billboards, and we can't promise you a bestseller list on your first week. But we don't alter our artists' work to suit the whims of investors. If you draw a blue sky, we won't tell you to make it red, because it sells better. She set a steaming cup in front of Estelle. Your draft, the story of the girl, and the half-finished garden. It has a beautiful, quiet grief to it, but it felt incomplete, not just because the pages were missing but because the spirit of the artist felt hesitant, like you were afraid to paint the shadows too dark. Estelle stared into her tea, watching the yellow blossoms expand in the hot water. I was trying to make it fit into someone else's world. I wanted it to be gentle, so it wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. Art isn't meant to keep people comfortable, Clara said softly. Go to your room, sleep for a day. Then clean your brushes and start again. This time, don't worry about who is looking over your shoulder. That night, Estelle lay in a small, low bed in the loft above the studio. Outside her window, the rain began to fall, a steady, rhythmic drumming against the tiled roof. For the first time in years, the knot in her chest loosened, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Back in the capital, the rain was also falling, but it carried none of the southern gentleness. It beat fiercely against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the newly renovated apartment, casting long, watery shadows across the cream-colored sofa. Enzo Beck stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean she hasn't checked into her office?" His voice was tight, laced with an irritation that had been building for the past 3 days.
Did
she file for leave? Did she speak to her manager? Mr. Beck, his assistant, Mark, replied cautiously over the line. MS. Blackwood resigned 3 days ago. She didn't ask for severance and she didn't leave a forwarding address. Her desk is completely cleared out. Enzo hung up without another word. He threw the phone onto the kitchen island, where it slid and hit a ceramic mug, sending a sharp, echoing clink through the quiet room. Enzo. Natalie stepped out of the guest bedroom, wearing a soft, oversized cashmere sweater that belonged to him. She held a glass of warm milk, her eyes wide and anxious. "Is there still no news from Estelle? I'm so sorry if I hadn't lost my temper during dinner with your mother. She wouldn't have run off like this. It's all my fault." Enzo looked at her. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of annoyance at her tears. Usually, Natalie's vulnerability brought out a fierce, protective instinct in him. But today, her delicate frame and trembling voice only made the apartment feel smaller, suffocatingly so. "It's not your fault," Enzo said, though his tone was flat. "Estelle is just being stubborn. She's done this before, locking herself away when she's upset. She wants me to chase her. But she took her drawing board," Natalie whispered, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "And she was so angry about that necklace. I really didn't know it belonged to her mother, Enzo. Your mother gave it to me so casually." "I know," Enzo interrupted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He walked over to the bedroom Estelle had slept in. The bed was made, the sheets pulled tight, without a single wrinkle. The vanity table was empty, save for a small, circular mark in the dust where her jewelry box had sat. He opened the wardrobe. All of her everyday clothes, the simple, dark-colored coats and sweaters she wore to the studio, were gone. Only the expensive, bright dresses he had bought for her to wear to social events remained, hanging like colorful ghosts in the dark closet. She had left behind everything he had ever given her. On the desk in the corner lay a small piece of paper. Enzo walked over and picked it up. It was a receipt from the bridal shop, dated the afternoon she had gone alone. At the bottom of the receipt, in the manager's elegant handwriting, was a note. The waistline was adjusted by 3 inches to accommodate Ms. Blackwood's weight loss. However, the train remains heavy. We recommend a supportive partner to assist her during the walk down the aisle. Enzo's fingers tightened around the paper, crinkling the edges. He remembered that afternoon clearly. He had been sitting in a quiet, high-end cafe with Natalie, listening to her cry about her failed marriage and her fear of being alone. He had looked at his watch, seen Estelle's message, and felt a brief twinge of guilt. But then he had thought, Estelle is strong.
she has
Always been independent. She doesn't need me the way Natalie does. Now, looking at the empty room, he realized he had never asked her why she was losing weight. He had never noticed the dark circles under her eyes or the way she had stopped talking about her dreams during their dinners. He had simply assumed she would always be there, a quiet, reliable background to his busy life. "She'll come back," Enzo muttered to himself, his voice sounding hollow in the empty room. "She has nowhere else to go. She doesn't have the family connections to survive in this industry alone." He turned on his heel and walked out, ignoring Natalie's soft, questioning gaze. As he shut the front door behind him, in Lushue, the days began to blur into a quiet, productive rhythm. Estelle woke every morning at dawn, before the mist had risen from the canals. She would walk to the small market at the end of the street, buy a couple of steamed buns, and return to her studio. She spent her hours at the long wooden table by the window, where the light was
best.
the ruined sketchbook lay in a drawer, locked away. She did not try to recreate it. Instead, she began a new project, one that she had kept hidden in the back of her mind for years. It was the story of an old lighthouse keeper who spent his entire life tending a light to guide ships he would never see, only to realize in his old age that the light had kept him from ever seeing the stars. Her lines became bolder, less concerned with the clean, commercial perfection that her previous editors had demanded. She allowed the ink to pool in places, creating deep, textured shadows that gave the pages a weight and depth they had lacked before. "This is good," Clara said one afternoon, leaning over Estelle's shoulder as she painted a scene of the lighthouse surrounded by a raging sea. "There's anger in this brushwork, but it's controlled. It's not a tantrum, it's a storm." Estelle did not look up from her paper. "I used to think that if I made myself small enough, quiet enough, I could keep everyone around me happy. I thought that was what love was, holding your breath so you don't disturb the air." "And now?" Clara asked. "Now I want to breathe," Estelle said, her brush leaving a dark, decisive stroke across the paper, representing the jagged edge of a cliff, even if the air is cold. One evening, after the studio had closed, Estelle walked down to the stone bridge near the canal. The water reflected the warm yellow lanterns hung from the eaves of the old houses, their light rippling and breaking on the surface. She took her mother's emerald necklace out of her pocket. In the dim light, the stone looked deep and green, like the water beneath her. Her mother had been a quiet woman, an artist who had given up her dreams to support her husband's business, only to be forgotten when the business succeeded. And the husband found someone younger, more vibrant. On her deathbed, she had held Estelle's hand and whispered, "Don't let them turn your colors into gray, Estelle." Estelle had forgotten that promise for a long time, blinded by Enzo's charm and the illusion of security he offered. She had thought that by marrying him, she was securing the safety her mother had never had. With a steady hand, Estelle fastened the necklace around her own neck. It felt heavy, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like an anchor, keeping her grounded in who she was. She pulled out her phone. It was the first time she had turned it on since arriving in Lushue. Immediately, a flood of messages and missed calls appeared on the screen, mostly from Enzo, a few from his mother, and several from the bridal shop. There was also a social media notification. She clicked on it, her finger hovering over the screen for a moment before she opened the app. It was a post from Natalie, dated 2 days ago. It was a photo of the interior of the newly renovated apartment, showing the kitchen island where a delicate, hand-painted vase had been replaced by a modern, cold-looking marble sculpture. The caption read, "Out with the old, in with the new. Thank you, Enzo, for letting me make this place feel like home." Estelle looked at the photo. She expected to feel the sharp, suffocating pain that had gripped her in the bridal shop, but instead, there was only a dull, distant pity. She tapped her profile, opened her settings, and systematically deleted every photo, every mention, and every link to Enzo Beck. Then she selected his number and blocked it permanently. She did the same for Natalie and for Camelia Crawford. When she was finished, she turned off the phone, slipped it back into her pocket, and walked back to the studio through the quiet, rain-scented streets. The launch party for Natalie Spencer's new picture book was held at one of the most prestigious galleries in the capital, an event fully funded by the Beck Group. The gallery was filled with the city's elite, wealthy socialites, art critics, and corporate partners. Camelia Crawford stood in the center of the room, dressed in a sweeping silk gown, her face glowing with pride as she introduced Natalie to her friends. "She is such a talented girl," Camelia boasted, patting Natalie's hand. "Not like those petty, self-proclaimed artists who think a bit of temper makes them genius. Natalie's work is pure, elegant, just like her." Natalie stood beside her, wearing a pale blue dress that looked remarkably similar to the one Estelle had designed for herself for the engagement party. She smiled modestly, her eyes constantly darting toward the entrance, waiting for Enzo to arrive. Enzo arrived late. He was dressed in a dark suit, but his tie was slightly askew, and there was a weariness in his eyes that even the dim gallery lighting could not hide. "Enzo," Natalie exclaimed, rushing over to him and wrapping her arm around his. "You made it. I was worried you were too busy at the office." "I had some things to settle," Enzo said, his voice flat. He looked around the gallery, his eyes landing on the framed prints of Natalie's work lining the walls. The book, titled The Whispering Wind, was a collection of pastel-colored illustrations depicting a girl wandering through a forest of soft, blooming flowers. It was pretty, commercial, and completely devoid of any real tension or depth. As Enzo looked at the prints, a strange sense of unease settled in his stomach. He remembered the drafts he had seen in Estelle's studio, the rough, powerful lines, the way she could make a simple shadow feel alive with emotion. Natalie's work, by comparison, looked like something produced by an advertising agency. It was decorative, designed to please everyone and move no one. Mr. Beck, a voice spoke from behind them. Enzo turned to see Marcus Vance, one of the city's most influential art critics, a man known for his sharp tongue and complete disregard for corporate influence. Mr. Vance, Enzo said, shaking his hand. What do you think of the exhibition? Marcus adjusted his glasses, looking at the print in front of him with a cool, detached expression. It's very polite, Mr. Beck. The colors are pleasant. The composition is safe. It's the kind of art you buy to match your curtains. Natalie's smile stiffened, her grip on Enzo's arm tightening. Mr. Vance, I wanted to convey a sense of peace, a refuge from the harshness of the world. Peace, MS. Spencer, is only meaningful if we understand the storm that preceded it, Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the immediate circle of guests. Without that contrast, this is merely sentimentality. It reminds me of the work Estelle Blackwood used to post online, but without her structural strength or her honesty. It feels like a pale imitation. A tense silence fell over the group. Natalie's face went pale, tears immediately welling in her eyes. I worked very hard on these illustrations. I didn't imitate anyone. Of course not. Camellia stepped in, her voice rising in defense. Mr. Vance, you shouldn't compare a professional like Natalie to someone who couldn't even manage to finish her own projects. Marcus raised an eyebrow, gave a polite, empty nod, and walked away, leaving the three of them standing in the middle of the gallery. Enzo, Natalie whispered, her voice trembling. Did you hear what he said? He thinks I'm a fraud. He thinks I copied Estelle. He's just one critic, Natalie, Enzo said, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. He felt a sudden, sharp disgust, not at Marcus Vance, but at the entire spectacle. He had cancelled Estelle's contract to give it to Natalie, believing he was helping a victim of misfortune rebuild her life. But looking at the fragile, weeping woman beside him and the crowd of sycophants sipping champagne, he realized he had traded a rare, brilliant diamond for a piece of polished glass. He excused himself and walked out of the gallery, leaving the bright lights and the sound of false laughter behind. The cold night air hit his face, and for the first time, he felt the true weight of the silence Estelle had left behind. He got into his car and drove not to his family mansion, nor to the newly renovated apartment, but to the old, small studio where Estelle used to work before they got engaged. The building was dark, the door locked. He stood on the pavement, the rain dripping from his coat, staring up at the empty windows. He pulled out his phone and tried to call her again. The number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable. He tried her social media. The profile was gone, her pictures deleted, her very existence erased from his digital world. He leaned his head against the cold brick wall of her old studio, a terrible, heavy realization beginning to settle in his chest. She hadn't just run away to make him chase her. She had left him behind, completely and without a second thought. 3 months passed. In Lushue, the autumn had arrived, turning the leaves of the ancient ginkgo trees into a brilliant gold that fell and drifted along the canals. Estelle's book was finished. Clara had sent the final proofs to the printers, and the advance copies had just arrived at the studio. The cover was simple, a dark, towering lighthouse against a deep blue sky, with a single, brilliant beam of light cutting through the mist to reveal a sea of wild, white lilies below. The title, The Light We Left Behind, was printed in silver foil. Estelle held the book in her hands, running her fingers over the textured paper. It felt solid, real, and entirely hers. We've already received pre-orders from several independent bookstores in the South, Clara said, coming into the office with a tray of hot tea. And a few galleries in the capital have asked for preview copies. They're intrigued by the shift in your style. I don't care about the capital anymore, Estelle said softly, setting the book down. I'm just glad I kept my promise. You did, Clara said, her eyes warm. Your mother would be very proud. Estelle. Before Estelle could reply, the bell above the studio door chimed. Estelle stood and walked out into the main shop, expecting a local customer or a delivery courier. Instead, she froze. Standing by the entrance, his shoulders damp from the light autumn mist, was Enzo Beck. He looked different. The polished, effortless elegance he usually wore like armor was gone. His dark coat was rumpled, his hair slightly damp, and his face was drawn and pale, with deep lines of exhaustion around his mouth. When he saw her, a look of intense, almost desperate relief broke across his face. "Estelle," he breathed, stepping forward. Estelle did not move. She stood behind the wooden counter, her hands resting flat on the surface, her expression completely still. "How did you find me?" Her voice was quiet, devoid of anger or surprise. It was the tone one used with a stranger who had lost their way. "I found the shipping records for your art supplies," Enzo said, his voice trembling slightly. He took another step closer but stopped when he saw the cold distance in her eyes. "I've been looking for you for 3 months, Estelle. Why did you block my number? Why did you leave like that?" "I told you before I left," Estelle said. "The marriage is over. I have nothing to say to you. You can't just end 5 years of our lives over a misunderstanding." Enzo's voice rose, a mix of frustration and desperation. "I know I made mistakes. I know I didn't pay enough attention to you. I shouldn't have canceled your publishing deal, and I shouldn't have let Natalie stay in the apartment. I've sent her away, Estelle. She's moving into her own place this week." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, elegant velvet box, placing it on the counter between them. He opened it to reveal a stunning, flawless diamond necklace, its stones catching the light of the studio lanterns. "I bought this for you," he said, his eyes pleading. "It's 10 times more valuable than the one my mother gave away, and I've spoken to the directors of the biggest publishing house in the country. They're willing to buy your new book, give you a solo exhibition, and put your name on every billboard in the capital. Just come back with me, Estelle. Let's start over." Estelle looked at the diamond necklace, then up at Enzo's face. She felt no anger, no urge to cry, and no desire to throw his words back at him. She only felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. "Enzo," she said, her voice remarkably steady. "Do you remember the day I tried on my wedding dress?" Enzo flinched, his eyes shifting away for a fraction of a second. I told you I had to pick up Natalie. I stood in front of that mirror for 3 hours," Estelle interrupted, her voice quiet but clear. "Every time I bent down to fix the hem, I stepped on the train. My back ached, and my fingers were cold. And while I was doing that, I saw the photo of you kneeling in front of Natalie, fastening her shoes." She looked down at her own hands, which were stained with faint traces of blue and black ink. "You told your assistant to make the dress in my original size, because you thought I was throwing a tantrum. You didn't realize that I was losing weight because I couldn't swallow my food from the anxiety of trying to please your family." "Estelle, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," she said, meeting his gaze. "Because you never looked at me. You looked at the girl who is always there, always reasonable, always quiet. You wanted a wife who would look beautiful at your family dinners and never make a sound that didn't fit your lifestyle." She pushed the velvet box back toward him. "I don't want your diamonds, Enzo. And I don't want your connections. The book I wrote here, it doesn't need your name on it to have value." "Estelle, please," Enzo's voice cracked. He reached out to grab her hand, but she stepped back, out of his reach. "I love you. I've always loved you. I got confused. I thought you didn't need me." "I don't need you," Estelle said, her voice gentle but absolute. "I used to think I did, but I was wrong. The person who loved you died in that bridal shop. Enzo, I'm not her anymore." Enzo stood frozen, his hand still extended over the empty counter. He looked at her clear, bright eyes, her healthy skin, and the quiet strength that radiated from her. She looked more beautiful than she ever had in the expensive silk dresses he had bought her, but she was completely, irrevocably out of his reach. "Is there really nothing left?" he whispered, his eyes red. "Nothing," Estelle said. Enzo slowly pulled his hand back. He looked at the diamond necklace, then closed the box with a soft, final click. He stood there for a long moment, waiting for her to say something else, to show some sign of hesitation or regret. But Estelle only stood quietly, her gaze steady and indifferent. Finally, Enzo turned and walked out of the studio. The door chimed behind him, and through the glass window, Estelle watched his tall figure disappear into the gold-leafed streets of the southern town, his shadow stretching long and lonely behind him. By the time winter arrived, the capital's high society had a new topic of conversation. The launch of Natalie Spencer's book had ended in disaster. A prominent art blogger had published a detailed comparison between Natalie's illustrations and the early, unpublished sketches Estelle had posted on her old art blog years ago. The similarities in composition, color theory, and even the specific brush patterns were undeniable. The scandal spread rapidly through the industry. The publisher, facing intense public backlash and accusations of plagiarism, immediately withdrew the book from store shelves and terminated Natalie's contract. But the disaster did not stop there. A journalist, digging into Natalie's past to understand her sudden rise, uncovered the truth about her divorce overseas. There had been no domestic abuse. In fact, Natalie had been sued by her ex-husband for embezzling funds from his design firm, a legal battle she had lost before fleeing back to the country to seek shelter under the Beck family's protection. The revelation was a devastating blow to the Beck Group's reputation. Camellia Crawford, who had publicly championed Natalie as a victim of misfortune and a genius artist, found herself shunned by her high society circles. Her friends stopped inviting her to charity galas, and her husband's business partners began to quietly distance themselves from the family's investments. In the Beck family mansion, the atmosphere was cold and silent. How could you be so foolish? Enzo's father, Richard Beck, slammed his fist on the dining table, glaring at his wife. You dragged our family name through the mud for a fraud, and you let her wear Estelle's mother's necklace? Do you have any idea how much respect the Blackwood family still commands among the older generation of entrepreneurs? Camellia sat pale and trembling, her head bowed. I didn't know, Richard. She seemed so sweet, so vulnerable. She was a parasite, Richard hissed, turning his gaze to Enzo, who sat at the end of the table, staring silently at his untouched plate. And you, Enzo, you let a woman like Estelle go for this? You had a partner who was loyal, talented, and respected. Now our stocks are down by 15%, and our competitors are laughing at us. Enzo did not answer. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and walked out of the dining room, ignoring his father's angry shouts behind him. He drove to the newly renovated apartment. The space was dark and quiet. Natalie had moved out weeks ago, after Enzo had refused to pay her legal fees or suppress the plagiarism scandal. The apartment felt like a tomb. He walked into the living room and sat on the cream-colored sofa. He looked at the empty spaces where Estelle's paintings had once hung, at the corner where her drawing board used to stand, and at the kitchen where she used to stand in the morning, making him coffee with a quiet, gentle smile. He pulled out his wallet and took out a small, folded piece of paper, the receipt from the bridal shop he had kept all this time. He unfolded it and stared at the manager's note about her weight loss and the heavy train. He closed his eyes, and in the quiet of the empty apartment, he finally let his head fall into his hands. He wept, not for his family's lost reputation and not for his declining business, but for the quiet, brilliant light he had so carelessly allowed to burn out in his life. The launch of The Light We Left Behind was a quiet affair, held in a small, independent bookstore in the heart of Lushuai. The room was filled with local residents, students from the nearby art college, and a few travelers who had stumbled upon the shop. The air was warm with the scent of roasted chestnuts and tea. Estelle sat at a small wooden table, signing copies of the book. A young girl, no older than 10, stepped up to the table, holding a copy tight to her chest. MS. Blackwood, I love the story of the lighthouse keeper. But why did he have to let the ships go? Estelle smiled, her eyes soft as she opened the book to sign it. Because sometimes, sweetheart, you have to let go of the things you think you are responsible for so you can find your own way home. Did he find his home? The girl asked. Yes, Estelle said, signing her name with a smooth, decisive stroke. He found a meadow of lilies, and he realized he didn't need the lighthouse to see the stars. By evening, the crowd had dispersed, and the shop grew quiet. Estelle walked out onto the stone bridge near the canal. The winter air was crisp and cold, but the sky was clear, filled with a brilliant canopy of stars that reflected in the dark, still water below. She reached up and touched the emerald necklace around her neck. It felt warm against her skin, no longer a heavy link to a painful past, but a beautiful, quiet reminder of her mother's love and her own strength. Clara walked up beside her, wrapping a warm woolen scarf around Estelle's shoulders. We received a call from the National Art Association today, Clara said, her voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. They've nominated the light we left behind for the Illustrator of the Year award. They want you to attend the ceremony in the capital next month. Estelle looked up at the stars, the cold wind blowing a few strands of hair across her face. Tell them I'm honored, Estelle said, a gentle, genuine smile spreading across her lips. But ask if they can send the award by mail. I have a new story to paint, and the light here is exactly what I need. Clara smiled, patting her shoulder. I'll let them know. They stood together on the ancient bridge, watching the river flow quietly toward the sea, carrying the shadows of the past away into the dark and leaving behind only the clear, beautiful light of the stars.